Hello YouTube, welcome to today's video. Today's video is going to be a long one. We're going to be reacting to Exile's League of Legends Kha Zix history video. So get some popcorn, get something to eat, because this is going to be a long one. But let's just jump right into it. Chapter 1, Development.
League of Legends in 2021 is very different from the game that it used to be more than 10 years ago.
Wait, that was before my time.
With a new patch of changes every 2 weeks and a new season every single year, it means League of Legends changes and evolves all the time, just like Kha Zix. But one way that it hasn't changed all that much over the last several years is around the metagame of roles. We have this idea that it has to be so structured, where we need a top laner who will take teleport, that way he can move around the map and leave his lane. We have a jungler who must take smite and needs to gank and farm the jungle. We have a mid lane mage or assassin whose job it is to not only kill his lane but move around the map as well. And then we have a bottom lane duo of an AD carry marksman and support. Seems so odd that it's so perfected, but it didn't always exist that way. In the very early days of League of Legends, players and champions would just go wherever they saw fit, wherever seemed the best for that lane matchup, and it mostly worked just fine.
This we've all tried. We have all tried this. The first few games when you're leveling up a new account, when you don't have smite, because you only can get smite at level 8 or level 10 or whatever it is, 2-man top lane, the pain of that, and then once you're like level 5 or 6, you play against some random guy who would have smite, and then you're standing there, 2 people top lane sharing experience, and then the enemy jungler has like four basically part junglers that he can take, and then he's gonna be the highest level in the game just by power farming. Oh, we've all been there. It's still a part of the game, but only till like level 10 or whatever when you get smite.
Champion design philosophy, and if you look at some of the older champions in League of Legends, there's a reason why still to this day Tryndamere's E has a big AP scaling, even when the rest of his kit is entirely centered on building physical damage and crit. It's not exactly clear why this would be the case until you know more about the history of the game. Tryndamere was designed long ago for a very different meta, where Riot was not trying to force any typical builds on champions. They wanted you to try building AD or AP Tryndamere. Take him mid, bot, top, doesn't matter. Just try a bunch of stuff until you find something that's not only fun, but actually works too. As this game started changing and teams realized more and more that the best strategy was to have a proper jungling champion, a duo bottom lane, and 2 solo laners, Riot would have to switch up their philosophy and adapt with the rest of the game. Instead of an unstructured, free-flowing way of making champions, they could take advantage of it and start making champions for specific roles. Right around the time that Kha Zix was in development, the meta became solidified, and Kha Zix would be one of the first ever champions designed to be a jungler. Riot talks about this in their champion design notes by saying Kha Zix is a flexible jungle assassin who excels at surprising enemy champions and quickly dealing massive burst damage. Moreover, his unique evolution gameplay allows him to adapt to different enemy team comps and strategies by customizing his abilities over the course of the match. The staple of Kha Zix's design is the evolutions, and this was decided to be in his kit at the very beginning and would influence the rest of his design, all the way down to his art, his animation, his voice, and his story. They say that the core idea was a guy that evolves and he can mutate over the course of the match, and they wanted to capture that gameplay the best that they could because it was a strong and compelling idea. The development of Kha Zix is one of the most important points in League of Legends history and for Riot themselves.
Sheesh, a paragraph of
text.
text.
By far at the time the most complicated champion they were ever going to make. It's likely that they began working on him around late 2011 and early 2012, and because of that, if you compare him to the rest of the champions during that time, they were far more simple than he is.
See that? Kha Zix requires skill. Even Exile admits it. My champion's complicated.
The most important question for this kit was to figure out how the design would actually go for the evolutions. So what is evolution going to actually mean? Well, there was a ton of possibilities in different directions that they could take it. When would you upgrade? How would you upgrade? Would you be picking one evolution from a first and top tier, and then another from a second tier? How is it going to work? The key distinction that they ended up making was that the evolutions would be all centered around his assassin type playstyle, and the evolutions would not have the player pick between being a bruiser, a tank, or an assassin. They decided that Kha Zix was going to fulfill this assassin role, and you would pick from several different fun, cool assassin tricks for him to evolve, and ultimately that seemed more focused and fun rather than having him pick between a fighter Kha Zix, a tank Kha Zix build, or an assassin Kha Zix build. It seemed too broad doing it that way.
That's why Goredrinker Kha Zix was never fun. It was broken because Goredrinker was broken and Conquer was broken, but it was not fun for Kha Zix players because the Fadi was the reason why we played this champion.
As far as his Void theme, he also didn't start as a Void character. Instead, he was just a praying mantis type monster, but the Void theme would end up fitting so well with the story that they wanted him to consume things. They wanted.
Not gonna lie, I'm so glad Kha Zix does not look like this. Imagine if Kha Zix looked like this day and age. Holy shit. I maybe would have picked a different champion then.
Become the ultimate predator. The rivalry that he has with Rengar wasn't there from the very beginning, but because they were both hunting type champions and they drew tons of inspiration from Alien vs Predator, it just kind of worked out in the end. Because of his complexity and how unique he was for the era back in 2012, it would present some brand new challenges for Riot that they hadn't faced before, and one of the immediate ones was to make sure that the evolutions weren't just tied to the skill that you max out. You don't want to have it so that the first ability that you rank up has to always be the one that you evolve. There's actually a lot of situations in which you wouldn't want to do that. Being able to make a separate choice was extremely important from a gameplay standpoint, because otherwise the evolutions don't really add anything. It's just like, oh, if you rank up your Q, you evolve your Q. Instead, you can come up with a unique build where you might evolve your E first and get your wings, but of course the best ability to max is the Q. They also found it extremely hard to balance in their personal playtesting sessions because unlike a traditional character where you have 4 active abilities that you need to balance, instead you have 4 abilities in concert with 4 evolutions. The final thing they wanted to do was to make sure if the gameplay department and his kit was going to be the most complicated they had ever made, to not then slack off in other parts of his design as well. They say that at the time a champion averaged around 22 different animations, but this champion had about 40 during his design, and they also doubled the amount of animators working on him. Instead of just 2 animators, they actually put 4. With his base kit and theme finally wrapped up and ready to be released, there was only one more thing to do, which was to make his release skin. And a very interesting thing about that skin, Kha Zix, is that it was thought to be the most popular skin before the release of Elementalist Lux, which is to say that for several years it was the most purchased skin. This is pretty understandable because not only was Kha Zix super popular and a lot of fun to play, but also this skin had even more voice lines and animations, which was a lot more rare at the time. Because of the high bar that he set for champions.
Imagine if I was Mania's champion since 2012. Holy shit. I would have had so much content. But I only started playing this champion in 2016.
Champion design, it would mean that his skin would have to reflect that as well. It was the first ever release skin to be priced at 1350 RP. With everything wrapped up and ready to go, Kha Zix would hit the Rift in September of 2012.
Chapter 2. Release. Okay. Interesting.
Kha Zix has always had these 4 main abilities that we all know now, but over the years he has gone through a lot of minor changes, and his release is no exception to that, as the release version of the champion had a few differences. The main thing to note is that his R gave damage reduction while in stealth.
This was really broken. It would give you 50% damage reduction for... Can't remember how long it was. I think it was maybe the duration you were invis for. And you could like, it was really broken for tower diving because it did 50% reduced damage for everything, including tower shots. So it's amazing for tower diving. I remember this, but they changed it fairly recently after I played him for the first few times, I think.
Keep that in mind because it will be important later on. Also, on his evolved claws, he had execute damage based on the target's missing health.
I remember that as well.
A lot of people don't know that he used to have this in his kit because it didn't exist for very long. It would be removed a little while later. The general impression right away is that he was decent for the solo lanes, and specifically top lane, even though he was designed for the jungle. Because of his isolation damage, it made his top lane 1v1s quite powerful, and a popular build for top lane Kha Zix back in the day was using tier/mirror mana. This tier would help you constantly poke with your W. As for jungle Kha Zix, a common build at the time was Brutalizer into Last Whisper for maximum pen. Both of those items were super efficient and OP as well during those days. You could then turn that
Brutalizer costing 1337,
a GA, a Black Cleaver, or a Bloodthirster. With Kha Zix being pretty strong in both the solo lanes and in the jungle right after his release, only a couple of weeks later he would actually receive a nerf, and it was a pretty big one. He saw a damage decrease on both his passive and his Q, as well as the very important utility that he gets by slowing targets with his passive. Despite these nerfs, he would stay a strong, relevant, and popular champion for the rest of 2012 and on into 2013.
Imagine bonus attack ratio damage was 2.4 at some point. Oh my, so broken.
Season 3 and 2013 would be the first year that we would get properly organized leagues for competitive League of Legends. We would see the birth of the LEC, the LCK/OGN, and the LCS. Instead of just competing in random pop-up tournaments and hoping to do well for cash prizes, instead it was structured and there was a genuine pro circuit to follow. On top of that, in the actual League of Legends meta, there was a player who would change jungling forever, and he would change the way that the jungle role would be played, and that is Diamond Prox. Before Moscow 5 and the Season 2 World Championship, jungling was thought to just be a secondary support whose job it is to roam and gank and build supportive items or gold generation items. That way they can eventually purchase some real items, but more often than not they had very low income and they would just play something like Alistar. Alistar Jungle was one of the first truly overpowered junglers that would use this strategy to perfection. He would barely even CS and he would mostly just gank you for the entire game. The idea that the jungler can get real income, build real items, even take kills and CS, and you could play around a jungler as your carry player was foreign and unheard of. But with Moscow 5 and their jungler Diamond Prox, they did something nobody else did at the time back in 2012. They would play around him, and he was their most important player. Diamond Prox would invade the enemy jungler. He would hard farm and get real items to absolutely
the old
run
Evelyn,
over
old
the game.
Aatrox.
Instead of just defaulting to a Maokai jungle, a Nunu, or even an Alistar, he would play Shyvana or Lee Sin, use all of his income and do tons of damage, be really tanky, and just be this unstoppable force. This brought a new light to jungling and brought a new definition of a jungler. It wasn't just a ward bot, it wasn't just a second support. It was truly someone who could take over a game and influence the map. Because he was released right around that time, Kha Zix would be one of the first champions to utilize this new style of jungling, and that's why for 2013 he would be one of the best junglers in the game. During the first ever split of LCS back in spring of 2013,
and I wasn't even playing
Kha
at the
Zix saw
time.
37 games played with a 59% win rate. The ability to be a flex pick and be moved into the top or mid lane as well also gave him some extra priority in the pick ban process. One of the very first players to actually play him in competitive play in a solo lane was Good Game University's top laner named Fat. The laning phase didn't go all that well because
yeah, that's probably the best NA name I've seen till this day.
he was matched against a Renekton who was building really tanky with first item Sunfire Cape, but after about 40 minutes they eventually would scale into the late game and they would win in a very close fight. After about 10 months of being one of the best champions in the game, on patch 3.8, Riot would mini rework him. His Q would be given some new effects. Firstly, the unevolved version, if the target was isolated, would now gain 45% bonus damage, and for the evolved version, it would grant 8% of the target's missing health as bonus damage, which was further increased by isolation.
Damn.
His unevolved W was given a 20% slow for 2 seconds.
I remember that.
It would have
I think that was around
for
for season 4 or 5.
but it would no longer be able to be cast during the leap. Also, on his release, for some reason his E would apply his passive, but that was removed with this patch. And finally, the stealth damage reduction with the R was increased to 50%. The W getting a 20% slow doesn't sound like it would do all that much, but as a jungler, sometimes if you have no CC whatsoever, it can make ganks a little bit tricky. While it's technically a damage nerf that his E would no longer apply his passive, Kha Zix did not care one bit because the added damage
Holy
on his
shit.
Q was extremely
press Q
high,
3 times and
making
killed
his
them.
early game one of the best in the game now. This mini update that he received was meant to make jungle Kha Zix just a little bit better and help out his ganks, but that's not.
Yeah, if you try and do this play in Season 12 with Kha Zix, it's just gonna insta-die.
At all what would happen.
Oh
An
my.
incorrect shift in the meta would actually cause solo lane
no
Kha'Zix
shot, he
to
also
rise
kills
up
Warwick here.
substantially.
Yeah, I
In
was gonna say.
Season 4, Riot started favoring heavier damage in the game. On patch
Ooh, the
3.14
old
at
rune
the
system.
start of the new season, the adjustments to masteries were a lot better for offensive options rather than defensive
Oh,
options.
Masteries, my bad.
This would lead to a faster paced game than League of Legends had ever seen previously. Quite a few veterans quote Season 4 as the peak of League of Legends, partially because it was just fast enough that it was interesting and fun, and Assassins had tons of outplay potential, but not so crazy like we have now with Aphelios and Samira. Regardless of your opinion on Season 4, one thing is definitely true. The best defense was now a good offense. With this new assassin meta, champions like Zed, Rengar, Talon, Riven, LeBlanc, Kassadin, Ahri, and Akali would see tons of play during Season 4. As for Kha Zix, well, during the first few months of Season 4, he would move his permanent home out of the jungle and into the solo lanes because of one item called Elixir of Fortitude. If you wanted to make a list of the all-time most broken items that should have never existed, Elixir of Fortitude, which is sometimes referred to as Red Elixir or simply Red Pot, easily makes the top 3 best items we've ever seen. It was cheaper and arguably stronger than the Red Elixir that we have now with the Elixir of Wrath, but the main catch is that you could start it at level 1. That's right, it was a starting item. Even though it obviously didn't build into any items for you because nothing builds out of this consumable, that's also the case for the Doran's items, and we start them all the time. The amount of gold and value that you could get with it in the laning phase would more than pay for itself like 10 times over. The snowball potential was off the charts, and if you took this item on a strong early game laner, you could easily solo kill your opponent.
Since you're too honest and too cute since he's dead. How insane is that?
Activation, it granted you 15 attack damage and an instant burst of 120 to 235 health. It was also only 350 gold, meaning you could get some health potions too. The attack damage alone was more than you could get from a longsword or a Doran's Blade start, but also the instant health could be the difference maker in a 1v1 or even surviving a gank. Kha Zix would abuse this item like no other champion in the game could. He wasn't just hard to lane against, but more like impossible. When isolated, not a single
I would have
champion
loved
would
to try
outdamage him
this,
from
but I
levels 1
didn't.
through 6. This champion,
I didn't
who
play
was
Kha
designed
Zix
to be a
back then.
jungler, was now a mid lane assassin that reaped terror on the Rift. He would evolve and adapt to the meta around him and find himself in a new home in the mid lane. His strong solo laning with this item led to not only some nerfs to Elixir of Fortitude, but also some very big nerfs to Kha Zix on patch 4.3. The changes on patch 4.3 start with some pretty big damage nerfs. First up, his evolved claws would have the bonus damage reduced from 8% down to 6%, and the maximum damage against monsters would be reduced from 200 down to 100.
Oh my,
Next,
that's actually
Leap's
massive
bonus
nerfs.
AD
The E
ratio
also
was
is
reduced
nerfed.
all the way from 80% down to 20%, and while this is a big change in terms of numbers, because he doesn't rely on his leap for damage, it didn't matter all that much. Lastly, with the big nerfs on his Q, he received some compensation buffs on his ultimate. First, it would actually ignore unit collision when stealthed, and if you evolved it, it would increase the stealth duration by 1 second. This patch was thought to be the death of Kha Zix, the squishing of the bug. The champion was supposed to be significantly tuned down because these damage nerfs are huge. But sometimes in this game, weird things can happen where a champion is meant to be nerfed into the ground and actually gets buffed. Previously, I made an entire video about the best example of this happening in League history, where Lucian was supposed to be completely nerfed and ended up receiving a huge buff that let him play Earth mode in Ranked. The reason that this can sometimes happen is that when Riot nerfs a champion, they may try to compensate for them in other ways. A nerf that is meant to hit damage by a large margin may also come with a buff to their utility. The first time that Ahri was reworked back in 2015, they removed the damage amplification on her charm and instead gave her Q a huge movement speed buff. Everybody thought the champion would be dead because this mid lane assassin was losing roughly 30% of her damage combo. But in reality, on that patch, Ahri's win rate jumped to the highest in the game and one of the highest win rates we've ever seen. Because time and time again, we find out that utility in League of Legends is king, and damage and range can sometimes seem overrated. What happened to Kha Zix after patch 4.3 was very similar.
Oh
The
shit,
buff
it's
to his
Insect.
evolved ultimate increased the duration, and a couple months prior, as we went over, the buff to his damage reduction on his ultimate also coupled nicely with it, so it meant that he had a brand new playstyle, dubbed the Reverse Tank Kha Zix. There was no cast time on using Void Assault either, so at level 6 you could evolve your ultimate and you had 50% damage reduction for 6 seconds. All you had to do was kite around while in stealth and wait for your cooldowns to come back up. You could use
That's like
your
having
ultimate
Crown
to tank
these
an
days.
important skill shot for your team, considering
But
it
on
gave
your ult.
50% damage reduction, and this made a bruiser build crazy effective. You could go Maw, Frozen Heart, and GA, and that's all you needed to be basically unkillable, because you were also still Kha Zix. You had assassin-like mobility, stealth, and base damage.
I did get to play with
targets.
I did get to play with the damage reduction Kha Zix, but I do not believe I was going that build. But I was also super low elo back then. So I probably didn't know what I was doing. But I did get to play around with it though, so I remember
The
it.
pro player who popularized this build is one of the most famous players in history, Insect. He started stomping Korean solo queue and pro play with this build, and after the patch, even though everybody thought he would be super nerfed, it turned out that he now just became the best jungler in the game with this setup. The damage nerfs were enough to finally move him out of the solo lanes completely and move him back into the jungle, so since patch 4.3 all the way back in 2014, he's basically been a jungler. After being
So stop asking me if you can play Kha Zix in lane, because you can't.
Riot felt that the changes on 4.3 didn't
It's meant
solve
to be
anything
jungle.
for him. It just made the bruiser build even more broken, so they figured they might as well just try again. On patch 4.9, he got another big round of changes, and this was a really important patch. The base damage on Kha Zix's Q was reduced everywhere that the target wasn't isolated against your evolved claws. This was to incentivize him to never return to the solo lanes ever again and keep one-shotting you at level 1. This was also the patch where the missing health or execute damage was finally removed from his Q, and he has never had that mechanic since those days. With the rebalancing of his Q damage, they also did their absolute best to keep him in the jungle by giving him a better jungle clear, buffing his W damage to monsters, and increasing the slow to 50% on his evolved W. And lastly, of course, they had to remove the damage reduction on his ultimate, and it was gone for good. No more tanky bug. Heading into the Season 4 World
We'll gladly
Championship
take
in late
a clear
2014,
buff on Kha
a
Zix
big
now
question
on
after
W or
his
Q or
now
something.
third mini rework
This
is
day.
could he stay relevant in the competitive meta as a jungler? And it turned out quickly to be absolutely yes. During this tournament, he was the most picked jungler with 57 picks, and if you played during this time, you might even get a little nostalgic to see what his typical item build was. Spirit of the Elder Lizard, Brutalizer, Last Whisper, Hex Drinker, Black Cleaver.
I remember
Man,
these
all
items.
These items bring back some memories, huh? I wanted to show this typical build to also help explain what made him
Black
so
Cleaver
strong.
as well, I see.
All of these items were
Omen,
stupid
the
efficient.
buffed
for it. The
boots.
Spirit Stone item gave AD, cooldown reduction, health and mana regen while farming the camps. It gave a permanent red buff, extra gold generation, and it was all only 2,000 gold. At the time, Last Whisper was only 2,300 gold, and it gave 40 AD and 35% total armor penetration. Because it was so cheap and gave total pen, it meant that it wasn't even bad against squishier teams. You would always build this item pretty much right after your Spirit. The final item that helped you melt right through the enemy team was the Brutalizer, one of the all-time League of Legends most iconic items. Before it was removed from the game, it was one of the most efficient items ever, if not the most efficient. It gave 25 AD, 10% CDR, and 10 flat armor penetration, which was basically like lethality but even stronger, and all for only 1337 gold. It was so good on its own that even though it built into items like Yumu's Ghostblade and for a time Black Cleaver, players would just sit on the Brutalizer for the entire game and complete other items. With Kha Zix being the premier jungler at the Season 4 World Championship, some nerfs would be expected, and he received 2 more on patch 4.18 and 4.20. These nerfs happening back to back would attempt to knock him down a couple of pegs. They would hit his W in a couple different ways with a cooldown increase and a damage nerf, which meant that the bug would hopefully be a lot easier to deal with. and it turns out that he was. But not really because of these nerfs. I mean, sure, the nerfs did matter, but the game as a whole also changed a lot during this time too. Indirect changes around him would keep Kha Zix down for quite a while.
Chapter 3. The bad years. Oh no. I mean, I started maining the champion in season 6. And I didn't get to play with the execution damage on the Q. I did play with it though when it had a bigger AD scaling or bonus AD scaling, but I did not play with execution damage. The R reduction damage I remember because someone told me about it, but I don't think I was playing with it. I just saw some clips around it from back in the day when I just started like watching League but not playing yet. I don't think I got to play with it myself actually. I can't remember, so many years ago. But I started playing in season 6 with this champion. So I think season 5.
We've now made it to the only time frame in all of Kha Zix's history that anyone could say that he really wasn't that good of a champion. And from 2015 to 2016, he had some bad years. It's possible to graph out his pro play presence just to show how extreme it was. In 2014, Kha Zix was banned 102 times and picked 202 times. While that doesn't sound absolutely crazy, you have to remember that Season 4 had a lot less leagues going on and far fewer pro games were played back then, so at the time that was a presence of nearly 50%. However, in 2015, he was not banned a single time and
that
only
champion
measly 23 picks. That was just a presence of 1%. 2016 was
oh my god, and I started playing this champion in 2016. What was I thinking?
A 1% presence. For 2017 though, he went to the move. 322 bans, 811 picks,
Jesus.
a 37% presence. 2018 was more of the same, 527 bans and 432 picks,
2017, 2018.
20%. In Season 9, he would dip a little bit, but still clocked in a respectable 212 bans and 231 picks, a presence of 9%. And for last season, in 2020, the story is similar. Once again, he dipped down, but still saw 160 bans and 156 picks, still a respectable 6% presence. While 2020 was technically a down year for Kha Zix, clearly something happened in that 2-year time period. And of course we will get into what happened in 2017 and 2018 that made him go insane, but let's jump right back to November of 2014. The end of 2014 saw League of Legends progress from the old age to the new age. It's really when modern League of Legends started.
So this is basically part 1 of the video. So if you want to see part 2, then leave a like and type part 2 in the comment section down below, and then I will upload part 2 very, very shortly. And yeah, remember to subscribe in order to see that video. And then yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.